Hi, and welcome to the video. My name's Lockie. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer, and it's great to be here with you. In this video, we're going to look at how you can secure AI interactions across the environment within Purview. Now, this is going to be a more comprehensive video focusing on the key areas under which we are able to achieve this. We're going to look at the protection of sensitive data within AI interactions, governing AI prompts, a little bit about risk and within the AI space, but ultimately all of this is going to be governed under the Information Protection Framework. The Information Protection Framework gives us a way to understand potential risks related to the data that we collate, and it has a special section focused on data within AI environments. The ability to go through discover AI activity, how people are utilizing it, and prevent the exposure of data within these tools is important. And we'll use the tooling that we talk about in this video to reduce our risk overall and ultimately govern the environment in a way that allows users to achieve what they need to for their job without necessarily restricting them to the point where they can no longer achieve it. Let's get ourselves started with a little bit of a scenario. Now, the scenario we are going to walk through is one that is focused on a fairly common thing that we find with users. Someone who has gone through and they have copy and pasted sensitive data into a generative AI application, and that generative AI application has now gone through and responded with inappropriate output, i.e. something that has exposed that sensitive content. We're going to walk through the different ways in which Purview utilizes signals that are generated in order to find ways to enact controls and also respond to incidents such as this. We'll walk through the way that user actions, Purview signals, the different Purview responses all come through into a single setup to get us what we need. The Information Protection Framework has 4 key areas, and we're essentially going to walk through each one of them. To know your data first, make sure you can discover it. To understand and protect your data, work out the ways in which it needs to be surrounded and caged in order to have secure access. How we actually prevent data loss in a practical sense, and then what methodologies we need to use to govern our information. Let's dive in with our first important piece of the puzzle. The ability to go through and look at AI interactions and actually understand how people are using these tools today. This is going to be a critical component of it, because unless we can understand not only where our data is, but also how users are actively using generative AI tools, we simply cannot go through and provide the correct level of protection. The ability to go through and review AI activity across a range of different Purview tools, to be able to use the inbuilt reports within DSPM for AI, to investigate AI interactions across our auditing space, and the ability to look at different insight metrics to find where policies could be applied to fill gaps. This is going to be how we build our environment and ensure that users can work in a compliant manner using the tools they need to, and they understand the limits that are in place and the why of why those limits are there. But to start, we should talk about how AI activities work before you put in anything. Essentially, the problem that we are trying to solve here. If you have no restrictions in place, the scenario that we set at the top, a user that takes content, copies, pastes it into a tool that is a publicly available tool that has no guarantees about how your data will be utilized in that tool, you are in that scenario right now. If there is no protections around the use of sensitive business content or the ability to restrict how users copy and paste content into these sorts of applications, we have no control over it. On top of that, there may not be visibility in terms of how these actually go together. Now, this is all about just understanding how it is used. We are not looking to over-enforce right now and then under-enforce later. We're trying to strike a balance here. That may mean that we block certain tools for certain use cases, or we prevent certain sensitive files from being uploaded into generic tools and require the use of a bespoke AI tool, maybe even something like Microsoft 365 Copilot, because we can integrate within the broader Purview stack there. Essentially, we are trying to get as much visibility on how our users are using things today so we can understand where controls need to be placed in the future. Now, the DSPM for AI reporting section provides a range of different reports that are designed to take data that is distributed amongst many different parts of Purview and give you an easy, consumable, AI-focused area to understand where sensitive content may appear, where it is being accessed, and critically, where we are seeing hotspots. One of the early indicators of AI usage in an organization is seeing what teams and what users are utilizing these tools currently. Prior to an implementation of an internal tool or a sanctioned tool, unsanctioned use tracking can be a great way to understand where there are potential areas of, control required. Again, that control may be simply that users are yearning for access to a sanctioned tool with the correct protections in place. These reports provide you a great starting point to get yourself in the right headspace and understand where the trends are to be able to give you the right tools to see where there is the most activity. Because we're able to summarize usage across not only Copilot and the internal tools, but also authorized AI applications, browser-based tools, unsanctioned apps, as long as we can provide the data indicators, we can go through and give you the best possible view of where regulated or confidential information may go through and be represented. One of the useful pieces of this is the ability to look at where prompts and responses are actually being surfaced, where we're seeing these high use cases in sensitive teams. So consider it as a starting point to map where there are pieces there. Now, reports alone don't give us all the information we need. They're designed as an overview. So when we next need to go one level deeper and understand how users are actually utilizing this at a more granular level, that's where we cut across to the Activity Explorer. The Activity Explorer is used by a number of different roles within the Purview space, but when we're looking at AI interactions, this is designed as a mechanism to see how AI interactions cross-reference with the accessing and distribution of sensitive information. Essentially, because it gives you the ability to protect both prompts and responses, be able to correlate how that goes across to file access, policy actions, DLP, all of these different components, we can start to filter and track how interactions work specifically within the AI space. Within Activity Explorer, you're able to see each AI interaction separately as an event with clear fields. Who did what, when, and what content was involved, was any policies triggered, how it was all surfaced. Because you're able to trace a sequence of actions in this way, essentially working through step by step to have a clear understanding of the context, this helps us know whether a prompt is actually a sensitive interaction and also lets us know a lot more about intentionality. Is this a mistake? Was this unintentional? Or was it clear based on the surrounds of the prompt and what was written, what was accessed, and even trends within a user? Is this something that they have been doing for a while? Because this has interlinked with other Purview systems, if you are using something like insider risk management or communication compliance, we can also use this to review if a user that has previously gone through and been flagged during an interaction in the past, we can see if they are undertaking risky activities again with a new tool. It gives us ways to understand the different trends across the event state. And so it's a way to just view the information at a more granular and critically filterable level. So we have a way to view the holistic space within the reporting function. We then have a mechanism to go deep with Activity Explorer to understand how things are actually being used. And now we need to verify. We need to ensure that if someone is actually undertaking risk-based activities with AI tools, something that is an elevated risk scenario, we need to make sure that that's actually the case. Purview Audit gives us an authoritative timeline of who did what when, and because it has that same filtering capability to filter to an app or a service, we can use this as an extension and a complementary tool to the Activity Explorer. This is not going to be looking at a way to summarize information. We are looking at raw log entries. If there's an inconsistency in it or something that's unusual about the timeline, this gives us a way to look at the sources of truth directly. On top of that, because there are so many additional fields that are available within the audit search, we can essentially dive deeper. There are more details about how and when the interaction occurred. We can look at correlatory components around how sensitive content was accessed and maybe preceding file access events on a machine. It gives us more context to work with, which means we can understand things better. If you are looking to go through and support, say, an investigation or an incident response or some sort of regulatory framework where you need to report on risky activity, this gives you the ammunition you need to be able to understand how things are actually working. Now, the audit does have an inbuilt retention period, but it depends on the configuration within the organization. So make sure you think about how long you need to look back. There is going to be some inbuilt pieces here, but it is possible to go through and also augment this with things like Defender XDR. Additionally, audit logs are not necessarily turned on by default, and without it, many AI interactions simply don't appear within the Data Security Posture Management for AI subsystem. So make sure you are going through an enabling audit so you have all of this information at the ready and we can go through and generate the signals that we need to. As a last point, I want to just highlight one particular scenario, which is pretty important: oversharing. Now, oversharing is an unusual one because it's not quite the same as a data breach or a data spill, but it's more focused on exposure. This is something that AI tooling, generative AI tools like Microsoft 365 Copilot, effectively surfacing to organizations at a faster level. If we don't have proper governance in place, we find that AI tools are able to, well, do what they need to, uses existing permissions to see data that's available in your environment. What this sometimes surfaces, though, is that we have had an extremely elevated risk for a long period of time and simply weren't looking. Oversharing is one of the common areas that we see initial major improvements in the data estate once an AI tool is brought in, because this goes through and it is looking at sensitive content across the estate. If we're finding that we're seeing a large hit rate on an internal SharePoint that really typically was not accessed a lot after an AI tool comes in, there's clearly something that is of use there, something that is interesting to users to retrieve. It gives us ways to spot sensitive items that may be shared outside of the scope that they are required. Maybe we're pulling in things from specific groups or business units or high-risk projects where they should be scoped to users directly. Using the tools within DSPM for AI, we can go through and understand through AI data assessments where there is potential oversharing and where we can increase governance controls around data across the board. Essentially, by going through and ensuring we build these out, we can make sure it fills in the gaps, that we go through and we catch ourselves up. Ultimately, this is an improvement to our environment, a drastic one. If we can control how data flows more carefully and we understand where the restriction patterns need to be put in place, users will see exactly what they need to see and no more. This is a big win, and this is a great way to see what is currently potentially being overshared and where we're seeing sharing patterns more broadly. All of the things that we have just covered are the discovery phase. The discovery phase is focused on the identification, the understanding, the protection, and the governance of your space. If we can discover our information and understand where everything sits across the stack, we will be able to go through and pull all the pieces together. Understand where your sensitive data appears, what locations are required for users, where common places are needed, and where stronger safeguards need to be put in place. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to this. It is a journey and a strategy you will need to build over time. Whether it's using reports or Activity Explorer, using data assessments, there are many tools at your disposal, but it is about finding the right combination that gives you the information you need to be able to feed in to the next steps, protecting, governing, and then responding to threats as they occur. Now that we've performed our discovery actions, we now need to start putting in active protections. Some of these protections may already be in place. In fact, many of the protections we need in Purview for broader data estate management will apply to our AI interactions. There is going to need to be a way to review this and make sure that it is still fitting the needs of the organization as it evolves, though. There is a range of different AI protections that you can enable with one-click policies, and I'll talk about how to prioritize different risk activity alerts to make sure you are hitting the highest risk stuff first, and where we can actually surface this to you so you understand where those protections need to be put in place. Let's get ourselves started. Purview gives you many different avenues of potentially protecting your information, but the main mechanisms are sensitivity labels, ways of classifying your information based on the risk level, DLP, data loss prevention policies, which give you a great way to be able to understand how things are actually being evaluated. Basically, we can look through and take a look at AI responses as they come back. Browser and device controls, this also encompasses things like endpoint controls, so looking at text paste, file uploads, these sorts of pieces. And then, of course, the one-click policies. One-click policies actually encompass all of these areas, but we consider them separately because they are one click. These are designed as a way to roll out something fast. So if you already have an ongoing need to utilize these generative AI tools, such as Microsoft 365 Copilot or an external third-party tool, we can ensure that as quickly as possible, a baseline is set. So we'll begin with just these one at a time. We'll talk through how the sensitivity labels work, and I'll talk through a couple of one-clicks at the end just to give you an idea about where things might fit for you. Now let's start with those sensitivity labels. These are still one of the strongest controls you have in regards to what AI tools can read and generate. As always, AI tooling, such as Microsoft 365 Copilot, can only ever ingest what the user can see. So, by labeling something as a sensitivity label that a user should never see, we simply restrict it from the AI tool. However, separate to that, we do have a mechanism to enforce access rules around what sensitivity labels AI tooling should be able to see at all. If there is additional protections you wish to put in place, you can essentially use these labels as a way of safeguarding interactions to ensure that users, even if they are otherwise privileged to see certain types of data, only use authorized information within the generative tooling. Now, this goes in a lot of different ways. For example, if a file or email is labeled, Microsoft 365 Copilot will actually inherit that label on its responses and the conversation as a whole. So we can use this as a way to pass through the same sorts of restrictions around who should be able to see what, how sharing works, all of those sorts of phases there. There are some extremely useful things that this can leverage for us as well then. Because protected content can influence an AI output, we essentially need to make sure that the response has that sensitivity label. So downstream controls continue to work. It means that if AI interactions are shared later, say through a Word document or something along the lines, that sensitivity label continues to carry. It gives us a way to be able to rely on our Purview settings and the work that we've already done for securing our environment and understanding our estate to continue to work within our AI toolkits. Now, whilst Microsoft 365 Copilot and a couple of AI enterprise tools do support the integration with Purview, it's not a guarantee. You need to make sure that you are using a tool that supports this downstream support and can inherit the label directly. If you are using Microsoft 365 Copilot, though, anytime you use classified content, the label is inherited. That is naturally how it works, and it's how it has been designed from the ground up. There is no mechanism for a user to override these labels either. This is something that is done at the processing level, and it is all done inline and automatically. Separate to this though, you can still do DLP. There are still mechanisms to block and restrict content on the device itself, either by enacting on something like a tooling within the browser or just by using endpoint-based protection. So if you are looking to restrict a certain action with an AI tool, let's not think enterprise tools here. Let's say you wish to enable the use of public generative AI tools, but only for data that is marked as general, things that are truly public. We can essentially put restrictions in place using DLP rules to say, hey, here's a secondary layer of protection. If we see a sensitivity label being passed through to here, we need to stop that in its tracks. Because of the ability to then enforce things like tooltips, it also gives coaching to the user. You have gone through and taken an action that elevates your risk. Now we're going to teach you why your risk is being elevated and what tool you should be using instead. This consistency is important, especially as more and more third-party AI services become available. We want to ensure that if a prompt contains sensitive information or a policy rule is being put in place, that the user knows why that is happening and that they have a consistent idea of what to expect, that AI tools work in this way, can accept this data in this particular focus. Now, of particular interest is that ability to block the pasting and uploading of data into an AI tool. If you are looking to provide that level of granularity, you can do this, but it does require that browser-based DLP. This combines with endpoint DLP to look at also installed applications on a machine. So there's a couple of different approaches we can take. This one's important because anecdotally, I'm sure everyone knows a story or has heard of something where someone has just copied it in to do debugging or to understand the why of why something's broken. Sharing of information that's in a sensitive file needs to happen in something that is classified appropriately. So, by enforcing DLP policies at the browser level and at the endpoint level, using, say, the Purview browser extension or using Edge for Business and its integrations with Purview, we can have that same consistency even when someone goes through and is simply just using the clipboard. Essentially, as long as you put the right controls in place, we can block the pasting of text and the uploading of files into locations that should not support that sensitive content. Make sure you go through and you target your tools correctly, though. Within the DSPM for AI toolkit, there is a specific section that helps you target just generative AI tools, even when they're outside Microsoft 365. These service domain groups, such as the generative AI websites, which are managed by Microsoft, give you an easy way to do this without having to have huge allow and block lists. So it's a great way to start the place there. Note the note of unmanaged devices at the bottom here. That's an important piece of this too. If you are using BYOD and users are bringing their own devices into an environment, this gives you an avenue that if they're signed into a work profile, we can still enforce our policies. That one's important to me because it gives us the flexibility. If we don't have the ability to have a work-enrolled device, at the very least, we can still have controls about what data should flow where. All right, with those kind of down our belt as our mechanisms, let's talk the quick policies. These are just easy ways to put in recommended settings to get ourselves started. Consider them recommended safeguards or a beginning point. And over time, you will go through and build out additional DLP or label policies as you need to adjust. But if you are looking for immediate coverage whilst you still plan some more detailed configurations down the line, this is your curated set of protections. We are looking across a range of different spaces, but prompts, files, responses are the critical three. This means we're looking at DLP. We need to go through and put these in place. They're not full replacements for DLP or sensitivity labeling as a whole. These are just a way to confirm that the signals are working and then you can customize them. But they get you started and give you a go point. So start with the recommended settings that are there. There's a range of them and I'll show you in the demonstration some of the different one-click policies that are available. These provide those predefined sets of recommendations and you can deploy them without manual configuration or policy building. So even if you do not have a skilled team that is an expert in this space, we can still get you some broad coverage. Over time, customize based on your user environment and based on the use cases and usage patterns you see, and then build them out. What it gives you is early consistent coverage. So you can understand from day dot how users are going to use your environment. And more critically, on the flip side, users have their expectations set early, how these tools will work, how they should and should not be used. This is put in place as early as possible so we don't change the game. The more we change and confuse users, the less likely they are to be adherent to the things that we put in place. So it's important to try and set these guardrails first and provide them the access in a controlled manner and then build it out over time as we become more confident that the rules are set up correctly. This section has focused on the protect component of the information protection framework. Within this, there are a few key areas. limiting content, stopping sensitive data going where it shouldn't, blocking risky interactions through the use of browser or endpoint protection, and being able to use the insights that we gained in the discovery phase to guide where additional protection is required. Across these 4 different pieces, we will be able to work through with the things we have gathered so far, build out our protection, and ensure that as we build better governance of our data estate with AI as a focus, we can actually make improvements and make our environment more secure. Now that we have generated some text, we've got ways to be able to look at it all, we need to start governing AI prompts and responses in the exact same way we govern any other data in our estate. Retention policies and the ability to preserve prompts and responses as they come through, if they're sensitive in nature, they may be part of eDiscovery cases, insider risk compliance cases, or potentially part of some regulatory decision to keep, remove, or even revalidate content as it gets passed. So we'll talk about the different ways we can govern AI prompts and responses directly in Purview and work through step by step on how we actually get this job done. Now, whilst it feels different, AI-generated content ultimately fits in the exact same life cycles that we set for any other policy within our space. There's nothing really new. Ultimately, generated content could be sensitive, it could be regulated, or it could be business critical. So you need to ensure that you are managing the content and so it's available for audits, investigations, record management, all of those sorts of things. There are 3 key capabilities that are available to you: retention policies, collection policies, and eDiscovery. These are the big pieces of the Purview stack that allow us to work with AI interactions, either the messages sent or the responses from, to make sure that they are collected in the right way. Collection policies are important because they give us a way to target applications, in our case, say, Microsoft 365 Copilot, or third-party AI applications, even custom applications, and be able to say, hey, anything you generate here of this particular type of data must be retained for N number of years. We can target that more closely using different types of retention policies and labels, or we can use eDiscovery to lock that content in if we need to for the purposes of a case or an investigation. Now, the retention component is where I want to start because this is certainly the first and most obvious place to begin. When we go through and we generate this AI content, it'll be captured based on retention rules if the content is stored in Microsoft 365 or can be targeted within that space. When we go through and if there's some sort of business process or audit or legal matter that you need to work with, retention essentially gives you the confidence that that content will be available as long as the organization requires, whether it be a policy, a timeline, whatever it is you put in place. Now, the Copilot interactions aren't actually retained on their own. What we do is we actually route anything that needs to be retained into the user's Exchange mailbox. Then we can go through and apply conditions against the Exchange mailbox itself. It's an interesting back-end quirk, but it does mean that we can do a lot of additional controls on Copilot content, the prompts and responses, because we just treat it like Microsoft 365 content more broadly. It's captured in the mailbox and it has similar sorts of rules applied. Retention in this way means that AI interactions can essentially be aligned with the rest of your governance frameworks. Any content that's generated in this way can be governed through normal Purview cycles. If there's anything you need within that risk appetite space or a business need, you can essentially have clear control over how that gets brought in. Now, as part of the collection policy setup, this is separate to our individual labels. We may wish to go through and apply something that's a bit broader, effectively governing where certain AI content will be captured. I'm going to zoom in on this one a little bit. Within the data sources structure, there is a range of different cloud applications, devices, etc. that we can pull in. But note, unmanaged cloud applications are at the top and Copilot experiences are listed separately. These are different ways that we can pull in different applications within the AI space to ensure that we are collecting the data that we need to meet our compliance, audit, and internal requirements. This goes the same route as the previous mechanism though. If we detect content that needs to be collated or kept, It goes and gets routed to the user mailbox, and then we can search, review, and do all of the same sorts of things to it. Where this is useful is that this works for any AI enterprise AI application that can integrate within the M365 stack. This does mean that you will need to confirm that this is supported, or if you're developing a custom application, potentially extend your development to ensure that this integration is in place. But if we do it right, the policies will automatically route the content to the right place at the right time, store it in the Exchange mailbox so we can keep it for future purposes. Now, once we have gathered our information into a compliant location, eDiscovery can do its work. Ultimately, that's the goal here. Prompts, responses, interactions, all of the things that we need, as long as we have a mechanism to get it into a compliant state, into Purview directly or via an Exchange mailbox or through some other mechanism in a custom manner, we are able to audit it. The goal here is that we can bring everything into a single location, search through it using standardized tools, and if we've done everything right and it's in a governable location, we can do standard case management. eDiscovery gives us the ability to find content via a search and review it, and then we can choose if we need to avoid, say, a deletion or purge action on a piece of content because it needs to be kept for a case that is currently open. As long as we can get it into that auditable space, everything else just falls into line. Make sure that you are thinking about retention and deletion policies for your AI content. As with all other data that you store, it's important to know when it needs to be discarded. It's not a forever thing that you need to keep forever, but it is important to be able to go through and decide when things need to be kept. And eDiscovery gives you a way to follow things like defensible deletion. If we can provide a justification by collating things in an eDiscovery case before we perform a deletion action, we can say from a legal perspective the why. Why was this content removed? Why was this content that is auditable revoked from our environment? Typically it's a time frame, but it ensures that we've got the evidence we need. When you are looking to make governance decisions related to AI content, whilst the decision matrix remains the same compared to other pieces of data, there is something uniquely sensitive about the way in which generative AI tools work. Users may put in content that they otherwise wouldn't have shared in a chat, or may access things in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. They may even say things that are a bit different to how they would normally interact with colleagues. What this means is that we need to understand very clearly what gets kept, what gets removed, and how we document what those decisions were. Start your governance across these three areas. The first, retention. What do you actually keep? How long? What do you need to keep and for what reason? Make sure you work within your business and compliance needs and not just do it because it's just AI. There needs to be a decision here that is broader than just thinking about the generative AI tool itself and thinking more holistically about business decisions as a whole. Next, we need to discard things that are not necessary. Whilst it can be quite tempting to keep everything, there are many scenarios that show that over-retention increases our exposure and our risk. By ensuring that we remove content that is not relevant to our teams doing investigations, or we don't need for compliance reasons, etc., we can ensure that our risk level is lowered and we remove things when no longer required. And if you need to support that evidence, make sure you use traditional eDiscovery methodologies, choose retention policies, build out the same sorts of things that we would otherwise implement. It is also worth noting that Compliance Manager has a number of integrations in this space as well. So if you're looking for additional pieces around assessing risk or thinking about different governance choices in terms of what does and does not get kept, consider looking in that space for some additional controls that we can think about around communication back and forth within the generative AI space. What we have talked about have come under the govern piece of the framework. When we govern AI interactions correctly, we essentially treat it the same as any other piece of data. There are some unique qualities to it, don't get me wrong, but it is ultimately the same. We choose how we're going to retain our information. We collect it in a source that we're able to target for our discovery purposes. We're able to establish when and why we keep information. And as we feed in with our governance frameworks, things like our protect stage are going to have better response components to it. The more we can feed in these early stages, the better our response actions will be when something is misused. We have to understand how our users use it, what we have in terms of guardrails, and be able to validate what information we need to collate before we can finally get to the point where we can control how users should be utilizing these generative AI tools in our environment. Now, our final piece of the quadrant is our ability to detect and address risky AI use. Risky. It's an unusual word, but it's something that we see a lot in the security space. The risk level that a user represents based on their activities is an important thing to consider. So, when someone goes through and they provide a risky prompt or given a risky response or part of a broader risky framework of different interactions they may have, how are we going to detect and address that as we go through? As well as that, if someone presents a risky interaction within a generative AI space, how do we then use that to inform other policies? Risky interactions in one space indicate potential risky behavior everywhere. So let's think about how we can use this to be able to extend out where we detect these problems. Let's jump in. Now, there's 4 key areas that I want to focus in on when we're looking at risky AI activity, essentially risk-based behavior when someone utilizes an AI tool. The first is misuse. Misuse comes in a number of different forms, but think about this from a perspective of not just inappropriate content, but potentially even just using it for the wrong purposes. If someone is supposed to be utilizing a tool for low sensitivity content and puts in high sensitivity content, that comes under our potential misuse category. Once misuse can be identified, though, we can then start to understand the why. Through the review process, we can look at the different interactions and start to get an idea of why this is coming together. Since Purview can surface signals from DLP, insider risk management, communication compliance, audit, we can combine these signals together to understand where risky prompts, behaviors, responses, these sorts of things, then feed into where there may be inappropriate content or interactions being generated as part of an AI space. It's possible to put in stronger controls as well. As long as we're able to apply this to the user risk activity that is in an elevated risk space, we can effectively use adaptive protection to say, hey, risky interaction in location A means higher potential risk in location B. Once we have this ability to detect, we have an ability to respond. It's all about the alerts. As long as we have a mechanism to trigger an alert in a consistent manner for an understood behavior, we can ensure that users are detected when they try and undertake said behavior. So let's walk through these bit by bit. I want to start with the insider risk management as our first port of call. The patterns of AI misuse that we see under IRM are interesting because they look at things like activity sequences as well as sensitive content indicators. Beyond this, there is a number of AI-specific signals, and it's not necessarily about monitoring users per se. It's more focusing on patterns over time. Since IRM is used as a mechanism to look at heuristic analysis, over time understanding how a user behaves, what they typically do, what their browser patterns look like, things like that, we can use this as a way to understand over the course of a series of conversations with an AI tool where potential harmful behavior or inappropriate behavior may be happening. This can be through the files that people access, what content was involved, whether actions from a sequence are worth investigating. There's a number of things that we can use this here. This also works well for browser-based behavior because browser-based behavior allows us to look at areas outside of sanctioned applications. So if someone is using a browser for risky purposes more broadly, that can include unsanctioned AI sites or maybe connecting to AI interactions that might actually encourage the exposure of sensitive data. If we want to go through and use this as a way to pass through data, it's useful to use insider risk management as a mechanism for it. But there is one important thing I want to highlight here. IRM is designed to surface indicators of risk, not the actual prompts themselves. Now, we do have a way if we need to do full content review to achieve that, and that requires the Communication Compliance tool. So, IRM will surface the risk, but the evidence is in Communication Compliance. Communication Compliance has the ability to retain not only what someone accessed, but the literal words that they said. This is the same that we would get if we were interacting with, say, a Teams chat in an environment where we needed that communication compliance in play. It is extremely useful for being able to identify potential harmful, inappropriate, or non-compliant messages more broadly, and AI-assisted content is covered under this same behavioral pattern finder. Now, since AI-assisted messages can introduce sensitive data, inappropriate content, wording, these sorts of things into the mix, Compliance gives a way for reviewers to effectively find these individual items and then start to take corrective action, either by educating users, by potentially blocking users, or by going through and just understanding if there is something else we can adjust in the environment itself to discourage or prevent that behavior in the future. Now, tools like IRM DLP only give that signal. This is how we get the full actual data itself. It's important to note that there is a very, very clear reviewer workflow as part of this though. When an item is flagged, there is the ability to add comments and then you need to escalate. There is a very clear step. This is not something we can easily just click a button and suddenly get looking. Typically, this requires case intervention, and organizations need to develop a policy about when and why we're able to use these interaction signals, and especially who can see them, because they are highly sensitive. For more information about setting this up, feel free to head on over to Microsoft Learn. There's great advice on being able to come up with a plan of how we actually get this and implementation within communication compliance more broadly that can assist an organization getting on their feet with this process. Now, once we're able to go through and examine the content here, ultimately, even within communication compliance, it becomes another alert. The end goal is signals. Individual teams are able to do their investigation where they need to and then can pass the signals from all of those locations through to one central spot. Audit. Audit provides huge context of piece of information, all of the signals collated into one. And any of the alerts we build across these different interaction frameworks can then be fed into additional tooling, either into Purview's alerting system, Defender XDR, external SIEMs and SOARs. We can use all of the same signal pathways we have been building for years in the Purview space to ensure that when, say, a DLP alert alerts when a sensitive data was uploaded or attempted to be uploaded in a prompt, that insider risk management elevates the risk of the user, which then goes through and kicks off something in the audit log for us to be able to investigate how those tie together, which then feeds across to the security team so we know how this works. This is how we make the ecosystem function. Individually, Purview experts in each of the areas and with each of the solutions will build out the things they need to. You may be across just one or across multiple, but the goal is to work beyond just the bounds of Purview itself, to build things out and then start integrating across into the rest of the stack across the security space. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is just a little bit about adaptive protection. Adaptive protection in the Insider Risk Management portal often gets utilized as simple risk evaluation. If someone has an elevated risk, we don't allow them to go in and log into a sensitive application or something like that. But you can actually use the risk level adjustments in real time during an AI interaction. Think about it. When you're working with an AI system, it is typically a back and a forth, back and a forth. So what happens if one activity elevates the risk and we want to stop the next piece of the conversation? Using adaptive protection, we can perform these sorts of real-time controls, preventing users as they elevate the risk from copying data in or preventing them from taking further actions that may result in potential harm to the organization. Adaptive protection is able to do some very interesting things around DLP enforcement, some of the escalation components, and even the ability to go through and just broadly reduce exposure by reacting immediately. This is one of the most unique opportunities we have when it comes to the data loss prevention space, because risky behavior can be reacted to in real time by the generative system. Suddenly, something is no longer available because the risk level has gone too high. We notify the user, they know the risky behavior is happening, we can educate them in the future. This is important and paramount because we need to make sure that these things are stopped as soon as possible. So, as users utilize the system, consider using adaptive protection as a way to augment the policies you have already, especially in the AI interaction space. Don't worry about user risk too much in that it resets after a period of time. All of this is configurable as part of insider risk management, but there is a lot more to it. Just consider it as part of the dynamic protection space to reduce your administrative overhead and give you all of the best places to be able to work with users in the best possible way. This has been part of the detect and respond component of the framework. As the final piece of the framework here, we have essentially gone through and seen the cycle complete. Now that we're at the end, we're able to collate the signals and start responding to different pieces of the environment. But of course, it doesn't end here. Every piece of interaction that you build in the response section will build back to pieces of data that you may have missed or improve your protection strategies. By using the different strategies within the detect and respond space, we can ensure that over time, your capabilities increase and improve. So, consider this a life cycle. As much as there is 4 quadrants, it is all about building up and providing better exposure protection over time. Working back to our scenario, we started with a user copying and pasting sensitive information into an AI system that then responds in an inappropriate manner. Hopefully through this, you can now see we can absolutely go through and protect that interaction by using browser-based controls or endpoint patrols. Different sorts of governance decisions would be able to frame whether that data could or could not be copied in the first place and how it is then able to be moved. We can interact with the AI system itself. If it's an enterprise app, we can apply controls, and if it's not, we can determine what is actually sanctioned to be used in that system. If it's unsanctioned, we have ways of raising alerts and being able to feed that into other scenarios. So this gives us a holistic view, a way to see everything for what it is, be able to pull all of the pieces together. Now, to get ourselves really set in, I'm going to quickly walk through DSPM for AI. We'll take a look at some of the different things that are available within here. We'll do things like creating a DLP policy, creating a risky use policy, and I'll just show off some of the different ways in which we can work and interact with our system when we need to protect AI in the way that we've looked at. Now, whilst DSPM for AI incorporates many different Purview solutions at its core, we still have given you one central hub that you can go to so you can understand the general posture of AI solutions across your stack, whether it be Microsoft 365 Copilot or other. So, head to DSPM for AI as your one-stop shop, your central hub to be able to understand how everything is functioning in your environment. Note some of the required steps that are available there, including the ability to go through and select things like Purview Audit. Audit must be on as at least a starting point, and everything else is about ensuring that we can have the right actions to actually achieve what we need to across all AI applications, not M365 apps, various browser controls, cloud apps, etc. If you are looking for broader graph implementation, we also provide M365 Copilot recommendations there. You can jump in and get an idea of some of the different assessments that you can run and the different policy engines that will be available to you within that stack. What we're going to do, though, is focus immediately on the recommendations. There are a lot of different recommended implementation plans out of the box that you can simply select and enable, as long as you've got the prereqs in place. As a key example, taking a look at the ones that we have here, we can start with something pretty straightforward. There is some easy recommendations around risky behavior and sensitive data that, if we've got the right pieces in, would not take too long to implement. As an example, our data security for AI subsection contains a few different policies we might be interested in. Here we can see one focused on elevated risk users pasting or uploading sensitive info into an AI site. We will need to ensure that everything is set up in terms of the signals to be able to enact things in this space, but if you've got the pieces feeding in correctly, you can simply one-click create the policy. It's a template that's ready to go, designed to help you with the protection of these AI-based applications. What we can do is scroll on down, take a look at some of the other ones that are here, and once we've decided which ones we are interested in across the stack, such as sensitive info within Edge, or maybe some of the other pieces around unmanaged applications, we can create policies. Hitting create policies is going to immediately allow us to just execute on this. Start getting our pieces together to go through and provision essentially all we need to get ourselves started in our protection stack. Once the policies are created, we can take a look and see how they've been implemented and also drill through into the actual policies to understand what the implementation looks like. Now that we've got our first policy already in, the others are still being rolled out, we can actually go and view the policy details by simply hitting that policy detail button that scrolled past. Once we do select that, this is going to allow us to quickly go across to the actual solution that we wish to work with. Also note that secondary button though, Investigate Alerts. Whilst this is in testing mode, we won't be raising any alerts immediately, but once it is ready to roll out post-simulation, that is actually an easy way to jump into alerts specific to the solution and the implementation we're looking at. By clicking that button, and we immediately are brought across to the data loss prevention solution, and the policy itself is already brought up as well. Even though we do split all of these different actions across a range of different subsets of the Purview solution stack, we still have an easy way to be able to shortcut through to the right spot, specifically focused on that AI-based implementation. If you're interested more about the policy, you can see exactly what was implemented, the different areas that are targeted, specifically devices in this particular case, and the rules and the triggers that are being utilized to actually enact the alerts that had been generated. Note the ability here to incorporate a wide range of different elevated risk types, so things that are sensitive data. We've already built in a range of different Microsoft prerequisite and pre-ready to go sensitive information types, so we can get this off the ground as quickly as possible. If at any point you need to customize this, you absolutely can. Simply hit the edit button as you normally would with a policy, and you can continue to adjust and make changes as needed. But what it has given you is a quick start, a place to begin that already has the fundamentals in place, ready to go. Okay, with our first policy now created, let's go take a look at some of the other different options that we have available within the recommendations here. For example, we can go take a look at some of the risky interactions in AI apps scenario. This one's interesting because this is focused on that copying and pasting. So we're going to be looking at alerts related to insider risk management and browser-based behavioral changes. So if you are looking to track across Microsoft Copilot, enterprise AI apps, or even unsanctioned third-party AI apps, this gives us a way to understand potential risky behavior. All of the different policies subsets we see here do have a page over on Microsoft Learn. So if you need additional information, you can select that. But if we're ready to go, hit Create Policy, and this will go through and do the initial legwork to get everything set up so we can start customizing as we need to. Now, as a hint to the type of solution that we might be leveraging here, risky is the best way to target it. Risky behavior means insider risk management specifically. When we click the policy details, we can see more details about where it's being implemented. And as always, we can simply hit that edit policy and solution to view exactly what each of these indicators are doing. The indicators themselves are going to be focused on the visiting of generative AI sites itself. That is going to be one of the initial risk factors that we're leveraging. If you need to go through and modify this to be able to modify, say, the list of generative AI sites, or be able to make some changes around what represents a risky ideal, or even thresholds, we can simply hit Edit Policy, because once it is implemented, it ultimately is just a prefab template ready to go. We can select Next once it's ready to go. We see that it is a risky AI usage template, with device onboarding being one of the critical factors we need to focus on. We've scoped this out to all users currently, but you could exclude if you need to. And within our indicators, we can see what has already been selected. Risky browsing indicators, that is going to come through as part of the broader insider risk management stack, and a few focused explicitly on generative AI applications. For things like other AI apps, we're going to need certain signals and indicators I may not have in place right now. So if you're interested in capturing that behavior, make sure you understand what the indicators are and some of the prerequisites that will be required. Essentially, where do we need to get information from to be able to track and trend those signals? Once we've got our thresholds set correctly, which are set up by default, we can simply hit Submit. Since this policy is already implemented, realistically, I haven't made any changes here, but we've got everything ready to go. Now, speaking of insider risk management, if you are interested in further details on the types of indicators that are available there, you can either head to the Microsoft Learn documentation or simply head over to the Settings tab. In there, insider risk management indicators are available as a list, and you can view the different ones and what signals and data we get them from. As our next piece of policy adjustment that we may want to make, I'm going to look at unethical behavior in AI applications. This one can represent something that's a little bit ambiguous, but unethical behavior typically means in Purview that we're working with communication compliance. So this is going to be looking for communication violations in your environment. Things like insider risk, bullying, or unusual or unwanted behavior within a workplace. We've already hit Create on the policy, and it's going to use that communication compliance stack to get things ready. If we want to go view any further details on this one we do need to go across and actually take a look at the communication compliance stack to understand what the exact implementations look like. But we've got the details of what it is within the recommendation, and if we head across to our policy structure here, we can see where that policy lives. Here, we've got our data loss prevention policy we created, our insider risk management policies that we created and applied AI tooling to, and right there, communication compliance, DSPM for AI, unethical behavior in AI apps is present. So we've got all of our different policies ready in a single spot. At any time, simply hit that policy button and you will be able to see all of the different policies that we have implemented so far. So if you're looking for an easy way to just ID it all at once, that's the place to go. Now, one factor that can be difficult is understanding what policies you should be implementing first. So, in order to assist this, DSPM for AI comes with a few additional tools that are more focused on an assessment-based approach. If you're looking for further information to try and work out where potential policies should be implemented based on gaps that you may have or areas of interest, you can head across into your data risk assessments for more information about different things that you may wish to enact policies on. In the Data Risk Assessments tab, we're immediately presented with essentially a custom assessment option. Whilst there are pre-built assessments that we can utilize, and we are going to select one of those, you can also build a custom one with your own parameters to search for certain things where there may be potential oversharing or where we want to lock things down so we add the right retention labels, the right policies, all of the things that we talked about that are enabled to be enacted in the governance and final management framework of our AI solutions. Note that Fabric is also included in this stack, as there is a significant AI integration stack over there as well. We're going to create a baseline assessment here, focused on going through and looking for unlabeled files. Essentially, I want to know where in my environment AI is able to see unlabeled files across the space. More or less, this is going to give me an ability to search for and find places that data classification has not yet reached, but AI has. If you are looking for a way to ensure that Microsoft 365 Copilot only ever sees what you believe as an organization it should, this is the way to confirm your thinking. We'll select Next and choose the different source levels. Note the ability to also go through and do an item level search, but there is a maximum limit of 10 sources in this regard. Think of that as a targeted search as opposed to the source level that looks at everything all at once. So if we do need to do an item level search, make sure you target specific areas and potentially your highest risk areas first. We can choose to target specific users, or we can just target everyone all at once. And again, SharePoint and OneDrive are our main options, but we do have the ability to scope either of these to specific drives and locations if we want to try and keep things a little scoped in our rollout. And once we're ready, we hit Save and Run. This will take time to generate, and it'll collect data over the previous 30 days. So if you are looking to build out an assessment over time, create one, scope it out, and then use it as a way to track your improvement as you go. DSPM for AI itself is more of a hub than anything else. It's a centralized location where we can start collating information across the AI stack into a single spot. So no matter what part of your journey you're on with generative AI, integrations with Microsoft 365 Copilot, and the broad ecosystem of AI solutions, consider going to the DSPM for AI Hub to understand more about what things you can implement early to get the best protections as quickly as possible. Across this video, we have looked at the 4 key areas of data governance when it comes to AI. We started with the discovery phase, looking at how we can bring in interactions across a wide range of AI tools into Purview. We talked about how sensitive data can actually be worked with in AI tools. Whilst it can be restricted, there are ways to use it properly using sanctioned enterprise AI applications like Microsoft 365 Copilot. I looked at how governance is able to bring things together, how we can examine prompts and responses either as signals or as raw data to be able to understand how things are being used. And then we talked about the signal generation. Once that alert's in place, what's next? How do you use that to inform your decision-making further and then feed out that information to other teams that will find it useful? Thank you so much for joining us for this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.